Barnett is an award-winning environmental journalist and author of 4 books, including Sound of the Sea, Seashells and the Fate of the Oceans, and Rain, A Natural and Cultural History, both named among the best science books of the year by NPR's Science Friday. Ira Flavor. This is she is a 5th generation Floridian. How about that?
Wow.
And lives in Gainesville, where she teaches environmental journalism and directs climate and environment reporting initiatives at the University of Florida, go Gators, College of Journalism and Communications. Please welcome Cynthia Barnett.
Thank you, Flo. Is everyone still awake after that wonderful cake? All right. Well, there's coffee in the back if you need some. It is such an honor to be invited to present at the Rawlings Society, particularly on writing and weather, which is something I've thought a lot about in the context of different authors and different kinds of storms. So I'm going to start with how rain and big weather have been major influences in my own writing and that of so many other authors, including Marjorie Kinnan Rawlings and Zora Neale Hurston. There are some great questions we can get into about rain as inspiration and how romantically we can ever view weather and climate in the face of hurricanes like the 1928 storm that inspired Their Eyes Were Watching God, or some of the storms of the modern day being heightened by climate change. So Flo also asked me to talk a little bit about nature writing craft and the difference between creative and expository writing in terms of natural phenomenon. I think it's really important to not approach those two things separately. I sort of fuse them together in my own work, so I'll talk about that. And finally, I'm going to share some new science about how our warming world is changing rainfall and changing storms and what that means for the literature of storms. So first, I will explain how it is that I came to write the book on rain. You heard Flo tell you some of my many different titles. I have to admit my life's favorite title is being Rain's biographer. So the most important part of the answer is that I'm absolutely crazy about rain. Does anyone else love rain in this room? Great. I'm not surprised. So we're called pluviophiles. I'm a native Floridian, and in my childhood and now, I feel oppressed by burning summer afternoons and the hum of cicadas that grows louder and louder in dry times. For me, those dull afternoons are turned really epic by intense lightning storms and by the applause of rain on palm fronds. I'm also a better writer on a rainy day than on a sunny day. There's some science behind that we can talk about a little later if you're interested in that. But then in my years as a journalist on the water beat, I also came to see rain as life's great elixir, especially the depth of thirst when we don't have enough. And I'm sorry it's hard to see the slides in the back. If anybody, feel free to move forward and sit on the sides if you'd like to. I have several slides that have some important excerpts on them, but I can read those aloud if you can't see them okay. But the idea for rain really was sparked by readers of my previous books, which were also about water. So I would go around speaking on water, and at that time, that was still a time like 15 years ago when my first book came out, it was still a time when a surprising number of people did not want to talk about climate change or didn't accept climate science. And I came to see that even people who didn't want to talk about climate change loved to talk about the weather. They want to talk about extreme storms, epic drought, record rainfall, hurricanes. So I really I began to see weather and storms as a way to talk about how we can live differently with water, working with water rather than always fighting against it. So I think whether it's commenting to a stranger at the post office about a shared drenching or helping people out with sandbags as a hurricane approaches, storms really bring people together, and rain can be a unifying force in literature as in society. Now, for those of you in the back who can't see the slides very well, I've had a lot of fun at this guy's expense. This was a tweet that a guy posted right when my book came out. It says, books I won't be reading this month, Rain, A Natural and Cultural History. And I have gotten a lot of laughs out of this guy, but I want to pause here to say, there's sort of you're going to hear a lot of rain love from me, and you would read a lot of rain love in my book, but there's also another side of the story and a whole world of writing inspired by gloom or seasonal affective disorder. So this is something I write a lot about. One of my favorite chapters is called Writers on the Storm. And that's some of what I'm talking about today comes out of that chapter. But seasonal affective disorder is, of course, a really important malady that people suffer from. It's about 5% of the population nationally, but actually a lot more people, of course, in the North, about 9% of people in the North, and only about 1% of people in Florida. So I think the whole moving to the Sun Belt is driven in part by people who suffer from seasonal depression. But there is some fascinating literary implication to seasonal affective disorder. One being Emily Dickinson, who suffered terribly from it. And you can see the importance of light and what a treasure light is when it finally comes out after a rain. You can see how she feels about rain very differently than I might feel, or Marjorie Kennan Rawlings obviously felt about rain. So all of that becomes really important in music too. There are some really great songwriters, including Kurt Cobain. And so Kurt Cobain comes out of rainy Seattle, Morrissey from rainy Manchester in England. And so that gloomy side also inspires really powerful literature. So that's all really interesting stuff to think about. But anyway, as a nonfiction science writer, I'm always kind of keenly aware of my role in teaching people something and clearing up misunderstandings. So that's part of what I try to do in the Rain book. And I'll start with just the most basic misunderstanding, which is the very shape of a raindrop. So people from our earliest childhood drawings, we imagine raindrops falling this way, like a drip from the faucet with a pointy top and a fat rounded bottom. But this image is completely upside down. In reality, raindrops fall like this in the shape of tiny parachutes, their tops rounded by air pressure from below. Rain also has a reputation, I think unfair, for making the whole world dull and gray. And the truth here too, at least scientifically, is really quite the opposite. In both nature and the human story, rain gives life, and then rain blazes life with color. So the better the spring rains, the brighter the hills and valleys. Summer rains are the masters of color. The steadier they fall on hardwood trees, the richer the reds and yellows of fall. We can even thank the rain for the bluest blues in the sky. And I know you will recognize this science from Rawlings' writing, right? She writes a lot about a fresh sky and just the freshness of the world after a rain. It turns out that as dust, pollution, and other tiny particles build up in the atmosphere, our celestial sphere grows paler and paler from blue to milky white. But a good rain will wash that grit away and really shine up the sky to its blue celeste best. So dearth of rain is dearth of color in nature. It's dry prairie, dusty sand, desert animals with pale skin to reflect the sun's heat, whereas many tropical rainforest creatures evolved bright pigments so their kind can find them in the rain-blurred jungle. So many of you know that Rawlings was a keen observer of rain. Her ecstatic descriptions of every kind of rain has me convinced that she too was a pluviophile. She paid special attention to how animals respond to rain. So snakes crawling ahead of a rain, turtles laying their eggs ahead of it to keep raccoons off the trail, rain frogs singing, bluebirds bathing in a light rain. She also, when she's writing about weather, she infuses weather with a great electrical excitement. So in The Yearling, white seabirds fly over the scrub in an ominous sign to Penny that the September nor'easter is on its way. But Jody felt a lift of spirit like the seabirds. He loved storm. It swept in magnificently and shut the family inside in a great coziness. Work was impossible, and they sat together. They sat about together, and the rain drummed on the hand-hewn shingles. His mother was good-natured and made him syrup candy, and Penny told tales. He said, "I hope it's a pure hurricane." So here's Jody wishing for a hurricane. And who will admit to feeling a charge of excitement when the hurricanes are coming? Yeah. So this is a thing. This is actually what Jody expresses turns out to be a very common affection for the transformative power of hurricanes. And we feel the excitement of the coming storm, but it's not just like being excited about the storm. It is that feeling of having a sense of purpose, right? You're going to help your neighbors. You have a sense of responsibility. You're going to run around and do things. In today's time, I would add, this is a break. It gives a break in our kind of electronic chaos that surrounds us usually. So the Louisiana writer Walker Percy is well known for his theory of hurricanes. And I thought it was interesting to hear Marcia Feltz talk in a very polite way, I might add, about the extent to which people don't get credit for things. But Walker Percy gets a lot of credit for this theory of hurricanes that comes out of 1966, The Last Gentleman. But really, this is something that we saw in The Yearling, and you actually see it in other Rawlings writing. So Percy talks about his theory of hurricanes in essays and 2 novels, including The Last Gentleman, where he writes about a couple on a date in New York City who need to change their plans to deal with Hurricane Donna. A hurricane's approach, he wrote, brings people out of malaise and despair. We feel urgently, we talk with neighbors, we take action. He wrote in his novel, The Last Gentleman, "It was best of all when the hurricane's eye came with its so-called ominous stillness. Everything was yellow and still and charged with value." As we know, of course, hurricanes are also charged with menace, and the problem with Percy's theory of hurricanes is that it neglects the extraordinary hardship that hurricanes bring, especially for those who can't get out of harm's way or stand to lose everything. It's a lot more exciting and romantic to hunker down with a hurricane lantern and a good book when you have a well-built home, a good insurance policy, and money in the bank. And this, of course, is the personification of that, is Zora Neale Hurston's "Their Eyes Were Watching God," which, of course, tells the story of the Okeechobee hurricane of 1928. I think it's worth, I haven't been reading all of these for those of you in the back, but I think it's worth reading this one. 10 feet higher and far as they could see, the muttering wall advanced before, the braced up waters like a road crusher on a cosmic scale. The monstropolis beast had left his bed. 200 miles an hour wind had loosed his chains. He seized hold of his dikes and ran forward until he met the corridors, uprooted them like grass, and rushed on after his supposed-to-be conquerors, rolling the dikes, rolling the houses, rolling the people in the houses along with other timbers. The sea was walking the earth with a heavy heel. And of course, the scene describes what actually happened in Pahokee, Belle Glade, and nearby small glades towns. And the glades are the small towns just to the southeast of Lake Okeechobee. The area had been drained for agriculture, and in 1928, this incredible hurricane blows through the dike, which was a very, very weak dirt dike at the time, and an estimated 2,500 people were killed, most of them Black agricultural workers from south of the lake. So these pictures are from, I think they're from Belle Glade. One are the coffins piled up next to a canal, and this young woman on the right is the sole survivor in a family of 5. But those kinds of stories were taking place throughout Glades communities, which was a very different experience than the experience of the sugarcane farmers and other farmers who were living mostly in Clewiston. So if you ever wonder about the biblical question, if rain really does fall equally on the rich and the poor, the just and the unjust, of course history says no. And another really important moment in history comes in 1927 and then again in 1930. So in 1927, Americans endured the Great Mississippi River flood, with some of those same justice scenes that we saw southeast of Lake Okeechobee. And then just 3 years later, people are enduring the Dust Bowl that begins in 1930. And those devastated by the Dust Bowl also are people who can't leave, right? They're the poor tenant farmers, and then they do end up migrating west. Hardest hit by the Mississippi flood are Black sharecroppers in the Delta. So both those disasters too spark this extraordinary literature and writing on weather. So of course the ones that come to mind are Steinbeck's Grapes of Wrath and Woody Guthrie's Dust Bowl Blues and many, many other songs. The 1927 Mississippi River flood and others led to more blues being written and recorded on the subjects of heavy rainfall and inundation than any other natural phenomenon. Just fascinating. And if you get a chance, your homework assignment for tonight is to listen on YouTube to Blind Lemon Jefferson's 1927 tune, Rising High Water Blues. It's just an amazing piece of writing, like listening to Guthrie and the Dust Bowl ballads. If you listen to some of the blues that are coming out in 1927, 1928, you also will be very moved by the writing and the stories that come out of that time. So I'm going to shift to the modern moment and climate science and kind of what's happening now. A century later, we're really seeing some of those same kinds of trends, with the poor being far more vulnerable to climate change, both here in Florida and globally. And this brings me to the final part of my talk about just sharing some of the science of how storms and rains are changing in a warming world. So here in the United States, we already know that rain is coming down in heavier downpours. So this is a look at the increase in extreme rains by region. And the really interesting thing that scientists know now, they can use the computer models to say, what will it look like under different emissions scenarios? So the great thing is that we can see how much better off we'll be if we can reduce fossil fuel use and lower the carbon emissions that are warming the world. And the science, I'm gonna skip to this graphic quickly. The science of why there's more extreme rain in the world makes a lot of sense. A warmer atmosphere is going to hold more water. That's the simple explanation. And so when it rains, we're seeing more extreme rains in some spots. So this is just a look. If anyone is from South Florida, you may remember a year ago, there was an incredible extreme rain in Fort Lauderdale where 25 inches fell in 24 hours. So that was like half our normal annual rainfall falling. That was the Fort Lauderdale Airport gauge, measured 25 inches in 24 hours. And just, this incredible emergency caused not by a hurricane, but by an extreme rain. When it comes to hurricanes, a couple of different things are happening. One is that hurricanes can hold a lot more rain and sort of stall at the coast and just churn forward with rain. This is a look at Hurricane Harvey, which, as you may remember, just pounded the Texas coast with rain. Obviously, severe hurricanes and hard rains are nothing new, but as our oceans continue to warm along with the planet, scientists say climate change is amplifying the storms and their risks. So not that we will see more frequent hurricanes, but the hurricanes that we do see could be stronger and more intense impacts like extreme rains. So just sort of looking at some of the work that's coming out of this story. For those of you in the back, if you can't see this is the poor octopus who ended up in the parking garage in Miami. Do you remember this story? One of my former students is now the climate change reporter at the Miami Herald, and she broke this story. It was not a hurricane. It was like one of these spring extreme rains that I'm talking about. The sea rise is kind of blending with the extreme rains there to create more flooding. They're even seeing more sunny day flooding. But anyway, this poor octopus ends up in a parking garage in Miami. This octopus was rescued, but he's kind of become the canary in the coal mine for climate change in Miami. And so it's just so poignant to think about this octopus and his life in this freshwater flood. And thinking about the way Marjorie Canan Rawlings wrote about animals and rain, and just thinking about how animal lives are changing too. So I think a lot of the interesting work that's coming out now, a lot of the nature writing, I wouldn't even call it nature writing. It's more, it's edgier, but I think it can still be beautiful. It can still be beautiful. That's the sweet spot that I search for, and that I know Leslie Poole does as well. We're looking for that spot where we don't hit people over the head with gloom and doom, but we want to explain the science and also explain what's happening to the world, and still celebrate the wonder and the beauty that surrounds us even in this time. I will say that both literature and science writing are changing a lot with these stormy times, including this trend of doomsday climate writing, which is really, I think it does not serve our cause at all, but we're seeing a lot of this. Researchers have found that many audiences just don't engage with doomsday stories. They will stop reading before they get to the end of the story or the book. There's also evidence that this "it's too late" trope in some climate literature is pushed by the interests of people who are advocating for us to stay on the same business as usual path. In other words, it's another form of greenwashing and misinformation. If you say it's too late, there's nothing we can do anyway, then we might as well just keep doing what we're doing, right? And that means continued reliance on fossil fuels, and not thinking about ways we can live differently. So again, what I really learned after many years writing about water for a general readership is this importance of striking a balance between warning and wonder. And back to that explanation of the difference between expository and creative writing, I think the great sweet spot is to fuse them together, weaving science that can help people understand, and lyrical writing that draws audiences together around shared values. And I think Rawlings does that very well. Like, even though she might not have been interviewing scientists, she had very, very precise writing about the environment in her work, and sort of blended that with lyricism. So literature can still bring us together around the common values. She wrote in Cross Creek, expressing her own. We're going to give her credit for the theory of hurricanes instead of Walker Percy. She wrote of the Cross Creek inhabitants: "When the weather is so preposterous, either too hot or cold, or rain or drought, we seek excuses to be together, to talk together about the common menace." So I think literature can bring us together around the common menace and the common values, and the values we share for Rawlings: wind and the rain, the sun and the seasons, and the cosmic secrecy of seed. So I am going to end there and see if you all have any questions for me. Thank you. Yes.
I don't have a question, but I wanted to add to your lyrics and to your
Yes.
your musicians. but there's also Will McLean's Hold Back the Waters.
Yes, good one, really good one.
That talks about the 1928
Yeah,
Lake Okeechobee.
yeah,
Yeah.
great
That's
one.
That's a good one as well.
Yeah. Now you have 2 assignments for tonight. The other is Will McLean. Yes,
What was the
Flo.
name of the Blind Lemon Jefferson song, please?
Blind Lemon Jefferson is called Rising, I think it's called Rising Waters. It is called Rising High Water Blues, 1927. So I think he recorded that in Chicago like the very month that the Great Flood started. It went on for a long time, but I think it started in April 1927, and Blind Lemon Jefferson recorded that tune that very month. Leslie.
I just want to mention, Cynthia's done some really wonderful writing. If you haven't read her Seashells book, she talks about climate change and seashells at the same time. And I'm curious what you're working on now.
Oh, thanks. This was not a plant. Leslie is my friend, but we didn't even get a chance to talk yet. I saved this photo in case anybody asked me what I was going to work on next.
Yeah.
And this is a little bit of a long answer, but Leslie is right. So my book author career, I've decided, I finally saw it about halfway through. My book author career is following the water cycle. So I'm just following the hydrological cycle until I'm finished. So my first books were about water, surface water. My first book was about Florida. Then I did a global water book. Then I wrote a biography of rain. And then I was trying to figure out how to write about the oceans in that same kind of, unifying way that is part science, part lyricism, bringing people together around shared love for something. And that something that I figured out was seashells. So I actually spent years working on a book about seashells and our human lives with seashells, and also the animals that make shells. So now I have to finish the hydrological cycle. So the book I'm working on now is about groundwater and aquifers. And I'll tell you that that's a harder book. It's a harder book because these are things we don't see. And there's not this iconic seashell that's super, got an incredible human story like cowries and so on. So the working title of the Groundwater and Aquifer book is The Sea Beneath Us, in homage to Rachel Carson's Sea Around Us. And then what I'd like to do for my last book, which is the photo you see here, next I'll have to write about a river to complete this cycle, and I would like to write the next biography of the Swanee River, which is that's my people's river, so that allows me to, after being a reporter who reported all over the world, that allows me to come back to my home. Yes?
Do you eat the specimen from the seashells?
Do I eat the specimens? Do I eat them or keep?
I think E.
E-A-T?
Yes.
Oh, E. Okay.
That's a really, really good question. And I always loved raw oysters. I love to eat conch. I do not eat conch anymore. I have never eaten conch again since learning how imperiled queen conchs are. I don't eat them anymore. The only shellfish I eat are aquacultured cedar key clams. They're really, it's really a great aquaculture industry, and it helps keep the water clean in the places where clams grow. So working on that book really changed the way I eat seafood. That's a great question. Thank you. And yes?
I just want to say thank you. Thank you for what you're doing.
Yeah.
It's very important.
Thank you. Thank
I thought
you.
you were going to write a book about transpiration.
Evaporation.
I can't wait to read it.
Well, so writing the biography of rain got to include evapotranspiration because it's all going up there into the atmosphere. I think I probably couldn't pull off writing an entire book about evapotranspiration, nor would I want to. But I'm excited about the aquifer book. It's challenging. I'm trying to write a short, elegant little book about aquifers and not a really long book. Yeah. Yes.
I was going to say, raising a Florida daughter, one thing that I have loved is they at some of the natural science places where they do birthday parties, because you're always having these really great birthday parties at these parks in Florida. One of my favorite activities is the ice cream aquifer.
Oh yeah.
And a lot of these marine science centers will have the kids create an ice cream aquifer.
So smart.
And they teach them all about the aquifer by creating this kind of ice cream, and then the kids get to eat it. But it's such a clever way to think about it and to show them exactly what it looks like and have them make it.
Yeah, because people think it's like a flowing river underfoot, and it's not. It's all in the rocks and in the sand, and the ice cream with yummy toppings in it as a perfect way to express that. Yes.
So where I live, over in like Pasco, Tampa Bay area, a lot of people have issues with sinkholes.
Yeah.
So will you be addressing that as well in the book about the aquifer?
Yeah. So my first book, Mirage, opens with a sinkhole. Yeah, my first book, I wrote a lot about sinkholes, and sinkholes will also be part of the sea beneath us, but sinkholes are such a defining part of Florida and really important to the water story, especially the more and more we develop, because everything we do on the surface can help cause changes underfoot and help cause sinkholes to open. Yes?
Well, on that same theory, will you be addressing the mining? Because, Clay County, we had where our lakes dried up, they said, because of the hurricane, it wasn't because of mining. Will you be addressing anything like that?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, mining is a really important part of the groundwater story, both sand mining and phosphate mining. Is anyone here from Polk County? So the phosphate story too, phosphate mining dried up some of the earliest springs to go dry in Florida, including Kissingen in Polk County and White Springs up north of Gainesville. So all kinds of mining will be an important part of this book, yes. Yes, Donna.
This is kind of two questions, I guess. But, I know that a lot of the problem in Pasco was all the overpumping by Tampa, and then they passed local sources first. I don't know how that's really going. And second of all, down in South Florida, I've always been intrigued by those injection wells that they were starting to put water in the aquifer that was not necessarily treated water, and I don't know what that status is either.
Yeah, so I'll answer the Tampa Bay Water Wars story first. The Tampa Bay Water Wars, which dried up wells all over Pasco, opened sinkholes all over Pasco, and all these people who lived in Pasco County lakefront woke up to completely dry lakes because of overpumping in Hillsborough and Pinellas County. And the beautiful part of that story is that some 40 local governments came together to work together to manage water together. So they built a desalination plant, which actually turned out to be not that necessary, because they did so much to reduce groundwater pumping by like more than 100 million gallons a day, even with growing population. And then they've restored some of the areas that were some of the, faced the emergencies. So that really is one of the success stories that are pointed to all over the country. In terms of injection wells, to this day, there are polluters who say, let's just put it underground. It's going to be okay. There's a lot of room down there. Scientists understand the aquifer now. We know where we can put it so that it doesn't travel. And I just think that flies in the face of all the unintended consequences that we've seen in Florida and American and global water history. Yeah. Does anyone else? Yes.
Cynthia, you were talking about people that write doom and gloom. I've forgotten the author's name, but he was a writer at the alternative newspaper in Miami. Wrote a book about sea level rise.
Oh, you're talking about Jeff Goodell.
Yeah. What do you think of that book?
I love Jeff Goodell. I think he does a great job. So he's got a new book out called The Heat Will Kill You First. Jeff, it's really interesting that you ask about Jeff because I really like his books. The students like his books. I talk to a lot of young people who suffer from a kind of climate depression. Like they are so down about what's happening to the world and what they're learning about what climate change will do in the future. And they need to read about solutions and read inspirational work. The nice thing about Jeff Goodell is that he writes these hard-hitting books like The Water Will Rise, The Heat Will Kill You First, but he's very good at also reporting on here's what we can do. You know, Jeff is saying it doesn't have to be this way, whereas some of the doomsday, uninhabitable earth, we're doomed to climate chaos. Some of these books are just like devastating without enough hope that there are things we can do to live differently. And like I said, what's really a shame is that it's too late, there's nothing we can do. That just feeds into the people who are trying to stop us from making progressive change. So I think Jeff does a good job. And I think, again, there's this nice edge. La-di-da nature writing doesn't work in the 21st century. There's got to be this nice edge of reporting on what's happening and reporting on the solutions and showing the beauty and the wonder that still exist. I think those are the best books, and that's what I try to do as a writer. That's my own aspiration. Any other questions? Well, you've been a great audience. Thank you so much for having me, and I'll be at the book table. Thank you.